Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trilokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Twameva Mata Cha Pita Twameva, Twameva Bandhuscha Sakha Twameva, Twameva Vedya Dravinam Twameva, Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Marupena Sanstitaha, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstitaha, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Sanstitaha, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshmi Rupena Sanstitaha, Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. So, we are in the 6th chapter where Hemachyuta says, your fable is a fairy tale, because you're not old enough to have known all these multi-generations of characters. And Hemaleka said, dude, people like me don't mess with your mind. You do not know who I am, and you don't know what I'm trying to do. People like me are sincere. And then she goes into this marvelous discourse on Shraddha, faith. That we need to have faith to enter into the path. Doesn't mean to have blind faith. But we need to be a spiritual scientist, to have enough faith to perform these spiritual experiments. And then one of the things that I find so fascinating, she says, look at the efficacy of what you've learned already. Remember, she talked about that she's always looking to find where is pleasure, and she offers him the pleasure principle, And with it, he begins to get a disgust for worldly pleasures. How did that come about? Because of the efficacious import of her words. All right. Does anyone remember what verse we're on?
We should start 29.
Punit, will you chant for us?
Sure, Jim. 29. एकांत ग्रहणे वापि श्रद्धा कस्मात् प्रतिष्ठिता तत्राप्येकांत शरण श्रद्धा शरण एव हि. Even in grasping a settled rule or principle, why is faith established for you? Even there, one who has taken the help of a settled rule is only a person who has faith as his shelter.
So if you have a settled rule, meaning a principle or a way of life or something in the world that you think is true, you only act according to it out of faith. Going on, next one.
There was a note as well. Should I read the note?
Oh, sure.
Note. In the example given under the previous verse, the farmer has faith that plowing gives him a good crop. Thus, faith is the basis of all activity in the world.
Yes. Next one.
Tasmat shraddhamrite loko avisideshva sandhruvam tasmat shraddham dridham prapya sukhamatyantikam vraja. Therefore, without faith, mankind would certainly perish without breathing. Hence, have acquired firm faith, obtain everlasting happiness.
So have faith in faith. It's very interesting. One of the ways we exhibit faith and don't even realize it. Do you know any friends or family members who are of perhaps the gloom and doom school? They tend to look to the future with catastrophe. Oh my God, something's terrible is going to happen. We're doomed. We're doomed. Or you start a project and, oh, it's never going to work out. You know, everything I start always turns out lousy. That is actually an act of faith. Because what do we know about the future? I don't know. That's what we know about the future. But if you look to your direct experience, most of us have at least a few decades now. Has the Lord ever let you down? You may not have gotten what you wanted, but I have a dear friend who has a maxim that I like. The Lord has given me everything I never knew I really wanted. And the more we rely on that, the more we allow the inherent beneficence of the universe to operate around us and through us. So if you look to your life, you have 10, 20, 30 years, some of us 50 years, I 72 years. I have absolute empirical evidence that I'm going to be taken care of and that it's all going to work out. I have no evidence that I'm going to fall into some abyss, in some catastrophe. Even tribulations that have happened, it's all worked out. So have faith that it's all going to work out. It's all going to be okay. even dying is safe. And that's a faith in the fundamental beneficence of the universe, as opposed to having faith in gloom and doom. But what do we know for sure about the future? It's a mystery. But I have more reason to have faith that it's all going to work out than I do that I'm going to fall into some abyss. All right, next verse.
श्रद्धावरेण कार्येति मन्यसे यदि तृच्छृणु इयं च श्रद्धये वास्ते प्रवृत्तेर्नृपते सुतः तत् कथं ते प्रवृत्ति स्यादिति श्रुत्वा प्रिया वचः हेमचूड प्राह पुनः प्रियां कुशालभाषिणीम्. Friends, if you think that faith should not be reposed in an inferior person, then hear me. This conduct or inclination of yours is also due to faith alone. Then how can there be this conduct or inclination in you? Thus, having heard the speech of his beloved, Himachuda said again to his wife, who was saying what was proper.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last. Your voice broke up a little bit.
That thus, having heard the speech of his beloved Himachuda, said again to his wife, who was saying what was proper.
Yes, so she's saying, she's summing up the whole thing, that because of what has happened, because you've developed this dispassion, is that not reason enough to have faith in me, even though I may be perceived as apparently inferior because I'm a woman? Going on.
नूनं प्रिये सर्वथैव श्रद्धान्तव्यं यदा भवेत् श्रद्धां सत्सु विधातव्या यया श्रेयसमान्नुयात्. Dear, when faith ought to be placed completely, certainly it should be directed towards good or wise ones, by which one can obtain the highest good.
So here is the conclusion of it. We should put our faith in good and wise people. But how do I know if someone's good and wise? Well, you can only find out by being open, but keeping your eyes wide open. And you'll know. Go where you're being fed. And in the spiritual path, you don't want to have any kind of romantic loyalty. I love it at the end of Viveka Chudamani when the Shisha becomes enlightened. He says, by the grace of some guru, who knows which influence was the most operative? All right, going on.
असत्सु नो विधातव्या श्रद्धा वाञ्छिना अन्यथान्त सुनिश्चिते कुटिले बडिशे यथा बहि समे सुपुष्टेन मीनानां नाशनमानुयात् तस्मात् सत्स्वेव कर्तव्या श्रद्धा नास् सत्सु कुत्रचित्. Faith should not be placed on bad or unwise persons by one desiring the highest good. Otherwise, he would meet with the destruction as that of a fish in a fish hook, which is crooked and sharp inside and even outside due to a good fish meal made of flour. Therefore, faith should be reposed in good or wise persons alone, not in bad or unwise ones.
Another way you can evaluate a teacher. Jesus said something about his followers. He said, "By their fruits you shall know them." In other words, look to the students of the teacher. Do you find that they're happy? Do you find that they're making progress spiritually? Are they actualized and efficacious people in the world? And then, of course, look to your own direct experience. Next one.
Asatsu kritva shraddham ye nashameyu parepi cha satsu shreyo yuja shraddhav shataste nirdashanam. Those who may go to ruin having placed faith or those who may go to ruin having placed faith on bad or unwise persons, and others who, on account of faith in good or wise ones, are united with the highest good, are proof in this matter for you.
So if you have faith in an unwise person, pretty soon you should be able to see it. And if you have faith in a good person, good results happen. What are the things to look out for? I usually boil it down to just 3. Watch out for anybody who wants all your money. Is he working some sort of a grift? Watch out for anybody who wants to have power over you, who wants to micromanage your life and tell you what to do. You should marry so and so and all that kind of business. And watch out for anybody who wants to have sex with you. That unfortunately becomes the most common character defect of a lot of teachers. And it gets in the way. It gets in the way. There are other things. If you want to get a nice, concise list of things to look for, go back to Bhagavad Gita and check out what we call the Sthita Prajna Purusha section, the last 18 verses of the 2nd chapter. I'll give you a good description. Or you can go to Viveka Chudamani after he goes very exhaustively through the qualifications of a fit student. There's 2 or 3 beautiful verses about the qualifications of a fit teacher. I lied. There may only be just 1, but it's beautiful. Now that I think. All right, next verse.
Jim, I have a quick question on what you just mentioned.
Please.
What would you say of a teacher who doesn't fall guilty of the 3 things which you mentioned? They are generally nice people, but you sometimes wonder about whether they are themselves illumined.
Very good question. So I'm going to go back to Shankara. In that verse that I referenced, the qualification of a fit teacher, one of Shankara's literary techniques is when he ever has a list of things, the most important is listed first. And in that list, the first thing he mentions, just a minute, please. is Shrotriyam, well versed in the scriptures. So, in fact, we don't need an enlightened master for us to become enlightened. We just need access to a valid means of knowledge. In the end, the guru can't enlighten you. The guru is a midwife, or at best a gardener, can do a bit of weeding and pruning. We must do the work ourselves. And if the student is right, a rock will enlighten you. And if the student is not right, the Buddha himself could be your teacher and nothing will happen. So we got to understand where the locus of the power of sadhana is. Shankara says success in spiritual endeavors is entirely due to the degree of the qualifications of a fit student. Other factors such as time and place, while important, are fundamentally secondary. I would add to what he says, even the guru. Now we look at a person like Nisargadatta Maharaj. He just simply took what his guru said to heart. Then his guru dies. He's not awakened. Then he does his sadhana because he believed what his guru says. His guru said, "You are that, Tattvamasi. You are Brahman." Now, one of the things that a realized teacher can do for us, a Satguru, is he can begin to show us the awakened state of mind. When I would be around Swamiji, he was just so empty. If you could tune up to him, you just enter into that. But in the end, that's not essential. What's far more essential is we know what to do and we do it. And we have so many scriptures that are available to us now. One of the things Swamiji used to say, you really only need two texts, the Gita and Viveka Chudamani. That has everything you need to know about the spiritual life. Is that useful, Uday?
That is very useful, Jim. It really clarified very many things for me. Thank you. I've had this as a running doubt for a long time, so I'm very happy that you clarified it.
And you know, one of you Indians is going to have to help me. My memory fails me. But in the Mahabharata, there's a story of one of the characters who was unable to study with Drona, I think it is. So he has the little.
Eklavya.
Which character is it?
Eklavya.
And what happens? Does he learn to be a good archer?
He does learn to be a good archer, and then he goes to his teacher and says that I have learned from you, and the teacher asks him for his thumb as Guru Dakshina.
Yeah. So, but the whole point is, he didn't go study with that teacher.
Right.
He was ripe and ready. There's a lot of important truth in that. There's another story that I love. So down the street on San Pablo Avenue here in Oakland is the Siddha Yoga Ashram where Baba Muktananda used to be. And when Baba was here, there was a Westerner who came to see him. And that's when Chitvilasananda was his translator. She's now Guru Mai. But anyway, the fellow asks Baba, he says, I've traveled all over the world looking for the perfect master. Are you he? And Baba's answer was fantastic. He says, funny you should mention that. I've been looking for the perfect student. Are you he? And the fellow was quite honest with himself. So he hung his head and he turned around and was going to walk away because he was very aware of his own shortcomings. And Baba called him back and said, maybe we can work something out. So there is a relationship, there is a dynamic. But don't let perfectionism be the enemy of the good.
Got it.
And again, if you were to take a text, take Vivekachudamani, and commit yourself not into just reading everything Shankara wrote, but doing everything Shankara suggests, you can almost guarantee self-realization. Not just Vivekachudamani, but Vivekachudamani with a good commentary. So you get the subtle import of it. Now, contrast that with the person who goes from satsang to satsang, says, oh, I traveled 3 hours to get the darshan of Guru Shmuru. And oh, he was so powerful. And then they go home and they scream and yell at their wife and they never meditate and they're craving this and that and they're jealous of their co-workers. And, so they met a great Mahatma. They're not doing the yoga. Now, the other thing that the tradition frequently says, when the student is ready, the guru appears. And that certainly was true in my case. I had no idea that I would meet a Mahatma like Swamiji. It was a very strange God shot of how I met these people. I met this guy on the beach at Land's End playing the flute. And we struck up a friendship and acquaintance, and he talked about his guru, and I was going, oh, sure, And then weeks later, they were saying, we're going to go down to Stanford to see Swamiji. All right. You want to come with us? Okay. And it was life-changing, that one event. And I am a student of Vedanta now, not because I had any particular affinity for Vedanta. It was the person, Swamiji. It was he that touched me so deeply. If he'd been a Sufi, I'd be a Sufi. This just happened to be his means of knowledge. That's all part of the Shraddha that we talked a bit about last week, what happens when you can surrender to a matter of knowledge.
Thank you.
Lots of paradoxes with this. All right, next one.
अत प्रतीत्यत्येव युक्तकर्तु श्रद्धा न चान्यथा तत्कथं ते प्रवृत्ति तत्कथं ते प्रवृत्ति स्यात् इति पश्चन कथं तव. Therefore, trust is to be placed on someone only by ascertainment of the fitness of the person, not
I
otherwise.
think it's ascertainment, isn't it?
Ascertainment of the fitness of the person, not otherwise. For that reason, whence is your question, how can there be this inclination for you in the absence of faith?
Yes. So we should have what I call a good bullshit detector. And if you've done a modicum of reading and study, you can figure out pretty quickly whether or not what someone is teaching is a truth teaching. Going on, next one.
इत्युक्ता हेमलेखा सा पुनराह पतिं प्रियं शृणु राजकुमारेदं प्रोच्यमानं मया वचः. Thus addressed, that Hemalekha again said to her beloved husband, Prince, hear these words being spoken by me.
Going on.
यदा तत्थ त्वं कथं पश्न इति तत्र ब्रवीमि ते अयं सन्वा ह्यसन्व्या अयं सन्वा ह्यसन्वा यमिति ते निश्चय कुतः. What you referred to, namely, whence is your question, I shall tell you in that matter. From where is your certainty that this one is good or wise and this one is bad or unwise?
So now she's talking about how to have this discernment. Going on.
Satyasmin nishchaye bhuyat shubham satshruddhayeva yeva ye tat- satyasmin nishchaye bhuyat shubham satshraddha yeyah vai sopi lakshanata syat ichhadra lakshana sangata. When there is this certainty, welfare can indeed arise here by faith in the good or wise ones, even if even that certainty can arise from the characteristics of that concerned person. Faith would be associated with characteristics.
So she's saying one way to do that is have faith in someone because of their characteristics. So you start out by looking at simply the externals. If the person is drunk all the time and they're angry and they're greedy and they're attached to things, uh, they may be one of these wild wandering sadhus, but maybe not. Likewise, if you find someone and they're exhibiting characteristics, like I say, go back and read those last 18 verses of chapter 2 of Gita. It's a good guidepost. Next one.
Pramana alakshanam jnanam iti sorry pramana lakshanam jnanam iti chetatra sanshrinu ashradasya pramanam kim bhavetat tunirupyatam. If it is said that the knowledge of the characteristics arises from the authority of scriptures and the like, hear me in regard to that. For one not having faith, what can authority be? Let it be investigated.
So, for those of us who have a background culturally and with our families in these yoga traditions, we can have faith in a Mahatma because we uh, know the authority of the scriptures themselves. But if you don't have faith even in that, then it becomes even harder. Let's see what she says.
Anyatha hi pramatano विसंवाद्येत कुत्रचित् तस्मात् श्रद्धां समाश्रित्य लोकसर्व प्रवर्तते. If the authority of scriptures is not accepted and only the words of others are considered as authority, then the person considered as authority can never be contradicted anywhere. Therefore, the entire mankind acts depending on faith.
Yes. So if instead of relying on scripture as the authority, you rely on the inference of other people, well, there's no surety there. There's some expectation, but you still have to proceed on faith. Going on.
तत्प्रकारं प्रवक्ष्यामि शृणु निश्चलचेतसा अनवस्थिततकोर्वाह्यत् अर्को वापि सर्वथा श्रेयो न प्राप् प्राप्नुयाल्लोक इह वापि परत्र वा. I shall tell you about the way of faith. Here, with a steady mind, one who has unsettled reasoning with absence of finality, or one who has no reason entirely, cannot obtain the highest good in this world or even in another world.
So here she says, in order to be able to have faith, you need to be able to think. Swamiji used to thunder, blind faith is stupid faith and will fail you in a crisis. And he would always go, think, think, think. Use your reason. Real spirituality is profound common sense. Now it's subtle. We may have to move through some phases to understand what the scripture is saying. Going on, next one.
तत्रात् अर्कस्य कालेन भवेत् श्रेय कदाचन अनवस्थिततर्कस्य न श्रेय स्यात् कथश्चन. There, the highest good can arise one day at the proper time for a person who has no reasoning. For one with unsettled reasoning, the highest good cannot happen on any account.
Yes. So if your reasoning is poor, you'll miss the point. You'll get caught up in all sorts of ancillary or side things. It's funny. Part of where we have to reason is we look for our motivation for getting into the work. I was talking with a student a few days ago, and they were disappointed because they had thought that by coming to satsang here and stuff like that, that they would find friends and develop community. And I think that's very fine, but that's not the reason to come. Reason to come here is because you want the knowledge. The Sangha is to support you in that. But it's not a social club. Some people make friends more easily than others. But we also need to look at our own motivations. Our own motivations. Reason it through. Reason it through. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? I had a conversation with a woman several months ago. She was all upset because she belongs to this group where they chant. And she was convinced that because she wasn't a Brahmin, they were not letting her chant. That they were disrespecting her and stuff like that. And I asked her, well, why are you chanting? To get the respect of other people, or are you chanting because it's a great way to purify your head and heart? Who cares what they think? Leading the chant or following in the chant is being in a leadership role. It's just ego. It's just ego. It's kind of the opposite of why you're doing the practice in the first place. So we have all these hidden motives that we can have for getting involved in the spiritual practice, especially in groups. Groups are fine. Groups are the rule rather than the exception. There are lots and lots and lots of opportunities to look at our ego attachments. That's kind of a little bit of a side thing here. Going on, next verse.
Pura sahya girau goda avariti kaushikah न्यवसच्छान्त sumar sumati yata lokasattvakah tasya shishyastu shachtashaha stitata guru samashrayat. In former times, sage Kaushika lived on the Sahya mountain on the bank of the river Godavari. He was peaceful and wise and had known the secret of the world together with its true or essential nature. On account of dwelling with the Guru, his disciples were there in hundreds.
Yes, so she's going to relate a story. So there's all these hundreds of students living with this great sage. Let's see what happens. Going on.
The ekada guru manu gata lokasya sanstitam nirnentu buddhaya nugunam tada prochu parasparam. Once setting out to ascertain the state of the world behind the Guru, that is his absence, they, the disciples, spoke mutually according to their understanding then.
So they had a study group. The Guru is gone. They weren't having satsang, so they got together and they began to share their understanding of the Guru's teachings and their understanding of the scripture. A study group. Going on.
Tatra jagam shungakhyo vipra kanchina mahabudha sa sarvesham matam proktam adu chayad buddhi kaushalat. A certain Brahmana called Shunga, who was very learned, came there. He corrupted or demoralized the stated doctrines or religious beliefs of everybody through the cleverness of his intellect.
So he comes, this dude Shunga shows up, and he begins to shake their faith because they were not rooted in their understanding, and through perverted logic, he was able to shake their faith and understanding in the path. And we're going to find out that he's actually a scholiast of the void. He was a nihilistic Buddhist. Going on.
Shraddhya hat pragyo vivada nipunastada pramanat pramitam satyam ityukteshu dvijeshvatha अनवस्थितको वै 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 प्राह तक्कै कंसश्रयः शुंगाख्य Akshipan sarvan tatra vada kathantare. Due to absence of faith in the scriptures, his discernment was lost, and yet he was clever in arguments. When the Brahmanas said that a thing which is known is true because of authority or proof, Shunga, who was of unsettled reasoning, having no finality, and for whom such unsettled reasoning alone was the shelter, spoke there between talks of the nature of disputes, rejecting everyone.
So he finds fault in their faith in the scriptures and in the path laid out by it. Says, how do you know that for sure? How do you know that that's not just superstition? How do you know that that's not just made up? Going on.
Vipra srinudhvam madvakyam satyam na kwapi siddhyati pramitam yat pramanena tat satyam iti hiritam. O Brahmanas, hear my words. Truth is never established anywhere. It has been stated by you that what is known by authority or proof is the truth.
So he's saying that you can't use scripture as an authority for truth. There's no way to establish anything that's true. Now, let me tell you a real live story. With many Westerners, I tell them, well, I'm a perennialist, meaning I think that basically there's a perennial wisdom because people are basically the same. We all have bodies, we all have an emotional life, we all have a thought life, we all have an ego sense. But it's my experience that in any culture, through any period of history, anybody who goes through this process of quietening the mind, letting go of the world, and introverting the attention, they're going to see the same thing, this chidakash, this vast empty space of consciousness. And it's universal and it's perennial. Well, I had a dear friend who was a retired professor of religion from Duke University. And Roger was a Pure Land Buddhist, but mostly he was an academic. And we had a fascinating discussion. He said, there is no truth. He was a Shunyavadan. He says, there may be some common points of practice, but what the Christian mystic experiences, what the Hindu mystic experiences, what the Buddhist experiences, what the Sufi experiences, they're all different. And ultimately, there's nothing real. In the end, it's all shunya, void. There is no truth. Now, all I can say is, okay, knock yourself out. But my sense is he was more of a philosopher and less of a practitioner. Now, that's different than other Buddhists with whom I've talked who thunder it's consciousness. Sometimes they call it big mind, pure awareness. They have different names for it, your Buddha nature. Not all Buddhists are scholiasts of the void, what I call the nihilistic Buddhists. Now, we Vedantins, yes, our ultimate authority is Shruti, it is scripture, but ultimately it's verified by direct experience. Now, in this group of Brahmanas, they did not have direct experience. They were studying with this Mahatma. And then this dude, Shunga, got them all confused. With that in mind, let's go on with the story.
Tatra tena doshayuja bhavet pramitam nanu nishchetavya tatasvadau pramananam dushtata. There it would be indeed, there it would indeed be unknown by the authority or proof possessing defect. Therefore, absence of defectiveness in such authority or proof should be ascertained at first.
So he's saying, how do we know that the scripture isn't defective? What authority can we have in order to verify the authority of scripture? So that's his logical position. Going on.
Sa pramanantarakrita tatrapyaivam vichintya ityevan ityevam avasthanat na kinchit pramitam bhavet. That absence of defectiveness in such authority or proof is accomplished or decided by a different authority or proof. In that latter case also, it should be thought of in this manner. Thus, nothing whatever would be known due to uncertainty without any finality.
So if we say the reason we believe the Bhagavad Gita is the truth because it echoes the teaching of the Upanishads. We can say the writings of Ramana Maharshi, we think they're true because they echo the teaching of Shankara. Shankara echoes the teaching of the Gita. Gita echoes the teaching of the Upanishads. But what about what are they based on? What's their authority? And you see, you can't go back, you can't find anything upon which to base an ultimate authority. So Sunga is saying your premise that Brahman is real and it's your essential nature based on scripture, you can't use that as an authority because it's unverifiable, according to his logic. Going on. I think you're muted, Puneet.
Oh, sorry. Ata pramata pramitam pramanam va na siddhyati tasmat shunyashrayo hyesha vikalpo vividha sthitah. Therefore, the knower, the known, or the authority or proof do not become valid. For that reason, this manifold error exists with void as its substratum.
Yes, so now he talks about this uh, nothing can be verified, nothing can be known. So the ultimate truth is zero, void, shunya. That's the ultimate truth, void. The scholiasts of the void, we call them the shunya vadans. So actually, Dattatreya or whoever it was who wrote this book is taken a swipe at one major school of Buddhists in this particular story. Just a little bit of literary gotcha here. Going on.
Sopi shunyatmatam praptah pramana vishayatvatah tasmat shunyam na kinchita sadishyesha pravinyat praviniyanah. Even that void, on account of its not being the subject of authority or proof, has attained to the state of non existence. Therefore, void is not an existent thing even a little. Thus is the final conclusion.
So if ultimate truth is nothing, how can you know it? There's no way to verify nothing as an ultimate truth. So that's not even knowable. So you might as well just shoot heroin and have a drink, because it all is void. Going on.
Iti shungavacha shrutva teshu kechit dvijadhamaha tam shrita nishchaya bhasam babhuvu shunyavadinaha vinasham yutyatishta shunyabhavam param gataha. Thus, having heard the speech of Shunga, some meanest brahmanas among them, clinging to the semblance of investigation or conclusion, became expounders of the void. Believing in that doctrine, they fell into ruin, attaining to the extreme state of void, or a state similar to inanimate objects.
Yes. So those people who are scholiasts of the void, if they think the whole world is empty and void and nothing matters, what happens is you go to a state where the world tastes like ashes, and there's no joy in anything, and there's no joy in the bliss of the self. And this is a very sad state. I've met people like that who've done a lot of reading, but not a lot of meditating. And their world is void, but they have no reveling in the self. They're not very happy campers. Usually, after a while, they get very attached to the world again, and they kind of give up the idea of everything is void. Well, actually, what they can do is rationalize. It doesn't matter if I'm greedy or acquisitive or a jerk, because it's all illusion, it's all void, it doesn't matter anyway. So they fall into ruin, the Shunya Vadins, the scholiasts of the void. Going on.
Ye dvija saryahridaste shungasya prabhashitam nirupya kaushiketena samahita hridobhavan. Those brahmanas who had excellent minds, capable of proper investigation, having represented the utterance of Shunga to Kaushika, became persons with composed minds because of him.
So these subtler people, rather than going off with this partial, twisted understanding, went to their guru, in whom they had faith, and probably said something like, "Guruji, we have doubts. This guy Shunga came and was telling us all this stuff, and it seemed to make sense. Help us out, Guruji." Kaushika probably looked at them with all compassion, just emptied out. Because they were surrendered, their minds went with him. Satchitananda Rupaham Shivoham Shivoham. My nature is not void. It's existence, consciousness, and bliss. I am Shiva. I am auspicious. And in a simple moment, took them out of the silliness of perverted logic. Going on.
तस्मात् सर्वात्मना त्यक्त्वा तर्कं तमनवस्थितं सदा सदागमा यत्त तर्कश्रेयसमाप्नुयात्. Therefore, having abandoned entirely that reasoning which is unsettled, having no finality, let one attain the highest good with his reasoning dependent on worthy scriptures.
So we again review our authorities. The first is scripture. The second is the recorded evidence of the great saints and sages. The third is proper, subtle reasoning. It should agree with the first two. And the fourth, of course, is our own direct experience. It should all line up. Should all line up. All right, let's do one more.
Iti prokto hemachud priyayatyanta puna prapacha chatyanta vismittastam mahashayam. Thus addressed by his extremely intelligent wife, Hemachuda, who was very much surprised, questioned that noble-minded lady again.
So we'll stop here and he'll go on with his questioning next week.
There's 6 more verses left, Jim.
Oh, let's finish it then. We can do that.
Aho priyete vedushya midrisham na vidam pura dhanyasi tvam aham chapi dhanyo yastva numakatah bravishi shraddhaya sarva shreyasiddhim hi tatkatham. Ah, dear, I did not know formerly your wisdom of this kind. You are blessed. Blessed also am I who have come to you. You say that the accomplishment of all that is good is indeed through faith. How is that?
So he now is beginning to see, oh, she's not just a smart lady. She has the sublimity, the sublime nature of a woman of wisdom. And so he continues to inquire. Next verse.
Kutra shraddha vidhatavya, kutra vasa na shashyate, anantya dagamanam, vai viruddhartha samashrayat, acharya mat bhedacha, व्याख्यात्रिं मत भेदतः स्वबुद्धेर् नवस्थानात् किमादेयं न वापि किम्. Where should faith be placed, and where is it not approved of? On account of the endlessness in the number of scriptures and their dependence on contradictory meanings, on account of the difference in doctrines of teachers, due to the difference in the opinions of commentators, and on account of the unsettled nature of one's own intellect, what should be accepted and what should not?
Yes, good question. So, how do I know which of the many paths to follow? There's so many different opinions, so many commentaries. If you read Shankara's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, and then read the ISKCON commentary on the Bhagavad Gita that Prabhupada did, they're very different. Which of the teachers should I follow? Let's see what she says.
Yadhyasyaabhitam tatsa vadyatyeva sunishritam anyachapya vavasthitam hani pradami pipriye. Whatever is accepted by whichever teacher, that he states surely as well ascertained. Dear, he declares another doctrine as not determined and also as causing detriment.
So, one of the things we see in many of our scriptures is they'll put forward the mode of thinking in their own particular school, and then they always have a section where they trash the other ones. Shankara does it, Gaudapada does it. I mean, and this will do it too. They'll take their jabs at the other schools. How do I know? You read a tantrika text, they poke a jab at the Vedantins, etc. All of them do it. Going on.
Tatraivam sati naivantam kaschidatra gacchati yashunyam ahatatvam sopyashunyam dushayet param. When it is thus under those circumstances, nobody reaches any conclusion at all here. Whoever declares void as the true principle, even he would find fault with the principle of the absence of void subsequently.
Yes. So even the scholiasts of the void will then criticize people who don't. So even if you say everything is false, you'll say those people who don't say it's false are not telling you the truth, even though you've already declared that it's all is false. So it's kind of a funny contradiction there. Going on.
Ashradhyeyam kuto vatat sangatam chagame hi etad bruhi priye samyag na hyete satyachintatam. That doctrine is indeed associated with or appropriate to his scripture. Why should it not be believed? Dear, tell me this correctly. This is indeed not one which is unconsidered by you.
All right. So he says, how will I know which is the true teaching for me and which is the true teacher for me? Very good question. This book is probably what? Anywhere between 700 to 1100 years old. Uday, isn't it interesting to know that the same doubts that you had show up in this book all those years ago?
Incredible. Yep.
What I find great solace in that, knowing that I'm just an average, ordinary yogi. I'm nothing special. They wrote a book about me 1,000 years ago. All right, next verse.
That was the end of the chapter.
Gotcha. We didn't get the answer. We'll have to come back
chapter.
next week. All right. So, any questions about this chapter or any other part of your sadhana?
I have one question, Jim. Just because this chapter also talks about the Shunyavadi Buddhists and so on. In having tried to learn meditation, I have heard a lot of Buddhist talks, and the way they talk about meditation is very explicitly in this language, which would not use any words such as consciousness, awareness too much. Is that a problem in terms of sort of learning it the wrong way?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Understand the historical context of the Buddhists' teachings. At the time, Hinduism was largely focused on ritual, and it was largely focused on acquiring punya and expiating papam. And in the Vedic literature, the term Atman is incredibly imprecise. Sometimes it means the Supreme Self. Sometimes it means the transmigrating soul. Sometimes it even means the body. It's very imprecise. Another one, Purusha, is used very imprecisely. Even in Gita, you have to suss out its meaning from context. So What Buddha did is he just said, there's no self, meaning any personal sense of self is an illusion. Now, one of the great values of Buddhism is it's not so much about studying philosophy, it's rooted in practice. So if you practice, what are you going to find out? Now, one of the words that Gaudapada uses to describe ultimate reality is avyapadesha, upadesha. In the end, it's untalkaboutable. So Buddhism largely goes to that. Now, there are practitioners who are, they wouldn't call themselves that, Shunyavadins. And I can't remember where I read it. But if you talk about the awakening or read about the awakening of this fellow Adyashanti, an American teacher, and he started off in Buddhism, and he couldn't get all the way into what the self is. I can't remember who he worked with, where he had his awakening. But it's not uncommon for Buddhists to get kind of stuck there. Now, again, I can only talk about my own personal experience. I was working with a wonderful kid. He was in his early 20s. He was skateboarder, surfer, Buddhist. And his teacher was I think she's a Thai Buddhist at a monastery in San Diego. And from what he described, it was identical with the Vedanta. It's all about the consciousness. It's all about the consciousness, she would say. But not every Buddhist teaching or tradition talks about it. And what I have learned over the years is there's not just Buddhism, there are many Buddhisms. I think a more fruitful place to talk would be, frankly, with Punit, because he's been a Buddhist practitioner before he came to me. And what your experience is about the difference in practice and in experience. So perhaps you guys can have that discussion offline. I am not a Buddhist. I have had discussions with Buddhists. Punit, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Not really. I think you covered most of what I would have said.
Okay. Thank you. I can probably talk to Puneet offline as well.
Sure.
But in terms of learning to meditate from just the mechanics of how to do it, and in setting aside the time to really do it, Buddhist retreats are great. I encourage all of my students to go on Buddhist retreats, largely because I'm too lazy to do retreats myself. But if you're not meditating, you won't get the fruits of this work. And 20 minutes a day, except on weekends, is probably not enough.
Right.
Any other questions? Okay, let's sit.